So, your breakout here at D6 is talking about resilient leaders. Tell us, what in the world do you mean by a resilient leader?
Sure. Well, in 2020, resilience became the Time Word of the Year, the Forbes Word of the Year. It's everything. Every time we turn around, people are telling us to be resilient, and telling us our kids need to be resilient. And so I actually did my dissertation on resilience back in 2014 before it was such a buzzword. And so as I studied that and thought about leadership, I think that there are some parts of resilience that we have to figure out for our own selves before we can translate that into how does that be a resilient leader. But in essence, a resilient leader, I think, is someone who can, and Bolsinger says this in his book, Tempered Resilience, it's somebody that can continue to fulfill the mission that God has called them to do despite internal and external challenges that we face. Internal challenges are probably the hardest because those are more the people that we serve with, the people that we lead. When we have difficulty with those people or we get hurt or betrayed by those people, those are the hardest things to recover from. But we certainly also have external challenges. Our world is changing so rapidly and the culture is so anti-Christian that we have a lot of resistance out there. So being a resilient leader means you can bump up against some hard things and figure out a way to move through them and to get to the other side. But I think part of that is just understanding who we are as a person and what we have to work with in order to be resilient.
Why is that so critical to have resilient leaders in the church then? Can you talk about how that plays a part?
Sure. I think in our world right now, I suppose maybe every generation says this, but it's probably never been harder, I think, to lead a church, whatever ministry God has called you to. And I think in such a connected digitally world, we're very relationally disconnected and a little bit isolated. And so there are things that we bump up against that we don't really have the emotional resources to deal with, I think. And so we can become very discouraged in ministry. I think when I was in ministry, there were a lot of times when I believed the lie that I was the only person struggling with that. I'm the only person who can't get volunteers, or I'm the only person who...
Oh, that's a funny one.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I'm the only person who feels like, if I was just a little bit funnier, if I was just a little bit more charismatic, then maybe I could do all the things that God had called me to do, or maybe my pastor just isn't quite as supportive, and so we kind of, we get discouraged because we focus on all the things we don't have, right? And so resilience, when you look at the research, what it is, it's a strength-based concept. And what it says is look at what you do have. Look at the things that do work for you. Look at the resources that you do have and use those to move through whatever difficulty that you have. But one of the things, and I didn't coin this term by any stretch of the imagination, but you may have heard people say we live in a VUCA world. Have you heard that?
I have not. Tell me
So
about
back
it.
in 1987, somebody in the Army came up with the word to describe our world, and I'm thinking it really fits today, but VUCA stands for a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, right? So volatile, everything's changing so rapidly. Uncertain, we really can't even predict what's going to be next week. Complex, there's so many things to consider. The puzzle pieces are so magnanimous, really, and then ambiguous. It's just hard to nail anything down. And so when you're living in a world that's changing that rapidly, with ministries changing that rapidly, I think about COVID, and I think of all the children's ministers, because that's what I was, who were thinking, wait a minute, I don't know digital technology. I'm not a TV host, right? All these things that we weren't prepared for. And so it kind of pushes back on us to have to be able to adapt pretty quickly. And I think that's the part of resilience that is so beneficial is, in some ways, part of resilience is being able to face something really difficult and then to remember in the past what helped before, or how did God show up before. And so it's sort of like an Ebenezer stone, like a monument that you can look back on, and say, okay, this is super hard and I'm very discouraged, but I remember a time when I was discouraged before. I remember a time that it didn't seem like it was possible and God showed up. And because I can remember that and know that He's faithful, I'm going to trust Him, in that situation. And so sometimes just getting our brain to get off of the high center of, I don't know how this is going to work. This is very discouraging. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I need to quit. To move off of that high center and look back and remember what God has done, it will help us sort of move through those difficult things that we're up against today.